The Color of Your Eyes, written by Blackcatsassin, read by gutterratt1213. Chapter 31, Forgiveness. Richy was on his knees, his eyes closed, ready to accept everything that was going to be thrown at him. Beside him stood Jessy, looking worried as she was fidgeting with her fingers, torn between protecting Richy from the blow or letting her friends vent out their anger and hurt. "You hurt us, Richy." Cleo crossed her arms. "Betrayed our trust," Thomas added, shaking his head. Phil gave Richy another look of disgust before looking away, gritting through his teeth. "You made Amy commit suicide, kidnapped Hannah, making me get into jail." "Yes, I am guilty, and I am ready to accept anything you guys want to do to me." The mechanic's voice sounded firm. "What about Hannah's kidnapping? What about you being the man without a face?" Dan asked, still looking angry. Hannah intervened. "Richy and I have decided not to tell the police who really kidnapped me. We're going to spin a story about it being someone else who wore a mask. We will, however, confess about Amy and Jennifer. That's for sure. I know we will probably end up in prison, hated by half of Duskwood, but we won't be hiding the truth anymore. I have forgiven Richy for holding me hostage, so I will not pursue judgment on that." "I see," Dan nodded, leaning back against his wheelchair. "I cannot tell you guys how sorry I am for everything, and although I know you guys probably won't ever forgive me, I can accept that. Whatever you guys feel and think of me, that is all right. Just please, I beg you guys, let me help you in finding Leah. I want to join you all to save her. I owe her and Jake my life. I promise you, once we have saved her, I will go to the police with Hannah. We will confess about Amy and Jennifer." Richy pleaded as he bowed his head. The others exchanged looks and either just nodded or shrugged. Phil didn't look pleased, but he was able to put his personal feelings about Richy aside for Leah. "I guess we could always use an extra pair of hands," Cleo sighed. "If Hannah says so," Thomas trailed off. As if I can keep on hating your moronic ass for much longer," Dan grumbled. "Whatever." Phil leaned his head on his hand. "I promised myself as long as Hannah got back safe and sound and everyone is alive, everything else doesn't matter," Lilly confessed. "I'm just glad you're back with us, Richy," Hannah smiled. Richy let out a big sigh of relief, and then shyly, he grinned as usual. "And you're okay with how he attacked you?" Phil asked Jessy with a frown. "Well, if you think about it," Jessy tapped her chin, "all Richy did was push me from behind and give me a scare. Okay, it was not cool, but it could have been worse. I just had some scrapes, and all are healed. The shock wore off, and I'm not angry anymore. Well, just a bit still." Jessy showed how angry she still was with the space between her thumb and finger. Phil snorted. "You're too forgiving." "So what if I am?" Jessy crossed her arms, looking a bit deviant. "Not just you, but all of you." Phil pointed around. "I start to think I'm in a bad movie or something. There's a guy who, let me recap, kidnapped one of you, held her captive for weeks, made an entire town quiver in fear, made the police look for someone, pushed a girl to commit suicide, threatened, scared, lied to each and every single person in this group, made me be thrown into jail." Phil obviously had enough, and he was now standing up, visibly upset. "Yeah, let's forgive him. He and that person," he pointed behind him with a thumb towards Hannah's bedroom door, "who made mess number 2. "We are sorry for what we did to you, Phil," Cleo said in between Phil's words. Phil stopped as if he didn't expect that sudden apology. "I'm sorry too, Phil," Thomas added. "Sorry, Phil." Lilly looked at him. "I'm sorry for telling the police that you might have been behind my car accident, making them have a firm reason to put you into custody," Dan said with remorse. "What?" Jessy and Phil shouted at the same time. "Yes, it was me. I made a false accusation, not deliberately, but I was so sure someone tampered with my car, making me get into the accident, which
I will admit it now, it was obviously my fault because I drank too much alcohol. Yo, lesson learned. Don't drink and drive, kids. You? Seriously, Dan? I thought you were the most decent out of this group. Even after you stood me up when I gave you the chance for a job. Even after knowing you're after my sister.
Thomas's eyes became round as saucers, and Lilly coughed while Hannah exchanged looks with Cleo.
You like Jessy?
Richy meekly asked, but didn't get a reply.
You're no saint either, Phil. In fact, you want to know what I think of you? I think you are the big asshole who thinks just because he had one sad, pathetic childhood, he gets to act as he sits on a seat right beside God Almighty, as the prime judge of human morality. You're a buffoon, a sack of potatoes who flirts with anything that is female. You are one of the worst people I know in Duskwood, right after Poke, Dan said with no remorse in his voice. Suddenly, chaos ensued. Phil and Dan were throwing insults at each other. Jessy tried to intervene. Richy was still on his knees, and Hannah and Thomas tried to calm Dan down. Suddenly, someone started to pound on Hannah's apartment door, and everyone stopped. Hannah went to the door and opened it, exchanged a few words before closing the door and went back with a red face, looking very embarrassed. Guys, it's almost 5 a.m, and my neighbor just complained to me because we've been way too loud for too long. If we don't tone it down, he's going to call the police, a.k.a. Alan, Hannah pleaded. Heavens, it's 5 already? Cleo asked in disbelief, looking at her phone. This is no use. We've been fighting against each other for hours now. Lilly sighed, rubbing her temples, feeling exhausted. Let's not forget the most important thing. Richy stood up, his timidness and shame having gone for a moment. The group went silent, feeling embarrassed of losing focus on their main concern. What would Leah say if she saw us right now? Richy added.
Jessy rubbed her arms. She would say we should not let our group be divided. She would say that we should remain strong together, Cleo whispered, closing her eyes.
She would be there for us, listen to our problems,
Thomas added, remembering how Leah was there when he went into the woods thinking about Hannah after he peeked into her phone. She would not give up on us, just as how she did not give up on me. Hannah smiled sadly.
She would, a hoarse voice said, making everyone turn towards him. She put herself aside to be there for others, ignoring her own worries, fear, anger.
Jake walked slowly towards them, still very tired. He lifted his hand, declining help from his sisters, as his legs were still a bit wobbly.
She would trust us, no matter what.
Richy lifted his head.
Yeah, that's something Leah would do,
Jake said softly, imagining Leah being among them. Come on, guys. We gotta work together. We can do it.
Let's save Leah,
Jake urged. The others had a myriad of expressions on their face as they thought about Leah and remembered her. Phil smiled, Jessy wiped a tear, Cleo sighed, Hannah glanced around, Lilly nodded, Richy looked down, and Dan leaned back. Jake placed a hand on his chest where his heart was beating.
Leah,